Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to be talking about the guidelines that you should keep in mind when you are writing paper 3. Um, so first of all, your paper is going to be roughly 8 to 10 pages, and by that I mean 8 to 10 pages of text. So your cover page and your references do not count, and your abstract, if you're including an abstract, do not count in that 8 to 10, in those 8 to 10 pages. An abstract is not required. It is optional. If you wanted to include one, that's fine. And an abstract is basically just a summary of your entire paper. It's not the same as an introduction. An introduction introduces your topic, whereas an abstract summarizes your entire paper. But if you do include one, it does not count in the 8 to 10 pages. Your paper should also have 8 to 10 sources, and these sources you have already outlined in your annotated bibliography. As you were doing your research, if you found that your research focus may have shifted a little, or one of the articles that you have in your annotated bibliography no longer works and you want to replace it with a different one, that's totally fine. Do try to use as many of the sources from your annotated bibliography as possible, but I don't want you to feel restricted where if something doesn't work anymore for your paper because your paper kind of transformed a little, I don't want you to feel restricted like you have to use that article. So it's okay to switch out a couple of them as long as ultimately you do have 8 to 10 sources in your final paper. When you created your research proposal, you also created a main question that your paper would be answering and some sub questions. And I gave you feedback on those questions in your proposal. So this paper is basically answering your main research question. Um, Now, one of the things that I had suggested to make things easier for you was to use paper 2 to kind of lay the groundwork for this paper, for paper 3. So if you chose to do that, then that's great. You already have half of the work completed, basically. If you chose to write on a totally different topic, then that's fine. You can create an 8 to 10 page paper on a completely different topic. You are not limited to paper 2. If you did choose to write, like if you're choosing to combine papers 2 and 3, the role that paper 2 would play is to basically be one of your sub questions. So for example, let's say you have this main research question: does the evidence from states where physician-assisted suicide is legalized justify the legalization of PAS across America? That's what your entire paper would ultimately be answering. Maybe for paper 2, you may have written on this sub-question here: how has the history and legal battles of physician-assisted suicide affected its acceptance in American society? So that was the question that paper 2 was answering. So now you can incorporate this into paper 3 by literally copying and pasting the relevant information from paper 2 into paper 3, and of course making whatever changes you need to make based on my suggestions in paper 2 and my feedback, and based on the overall direction of paper 3. Like, um, I'm sure some of the information from paper 2 would have to be changed, but for most of it, you like feel free to copy and paste it into your paper. And then you would go on and develop the rest of sub questions and answer those sub questions. So that's, oops, sorry, that's kind of the function of paper 2 in paper 3, like how it can be incorporated into paper 3. But as I mentioned, if you chose to do a different topic, that was totally fine. Another thing that you want to do is to synthesize your sources in this paper, which means you're showing connections between your sources. You don't have to do this for every single paragraph. This is a very long paper, so it might be a little difficult. Like sometimes you might not have multiple articles talking about the same exact topic, and that's okay. If you need like 1 or 2 paragraphs where you're not synthesizing your sources, that's fine. But do try to synthesize your sources for most of your paper, because it is a research paper, so we want to see that multiple sources are supporting or illustrating what you're saying rather than just you relying on one source. So try to synthesize your sources. There are 2 basic ways that you can synthesize your sources, and I talked about this more when we were going over paper 1, so you can review that lecture video if you want like further discussion on how to synthesize your sources. But there are two basic ways. So if we look at the sample student paper, the APA sample student paper, we can see that one of the ways of synthesizing is to list multiple sources in your parenthetical citation at the end of your quote or your paraphrase or your synthesis. So this here is a pretty long sentence. Yeah, this is all one sentence. And in this sentence, they are discussing ideas that were mentioned in these three sources. So they're not just saying like Gaff and Simpson said this, and then Lewis said this, and then McKeechee said this. They kind of read these sources, understood the content, saw the connections between them, and then they're making those connections in this sentence here. So because they're not listing separate bits of information, they're just going to list all of the relevant sources in their parenthetical citation, and they're going to use a semicolon between each source to indicate that these are separate sources. So you're just going to list out the author's last name, comma, the year that the article was published. If you are synthesizing very, very specific information and you want to include a page or paragraph number, you can do that as well. So you would put P period or PARA period and then a number, and then you would use a semicolon and list the second and the third source. So that's one way of synthesizing, is to just kind of like paraphrase and connect the sources more generally, and then list them in the parenthetical citation using semicolons. The other way, which you guys are more familiar with after completing papers 1 and 2, is to just kind of say what one source said and then what the other source said as it relates to the point. So as we can see here, we have this paraphrase is from Wilson, this quote is from Pounder, so they're just listing individual bits of information and citing each source. So what I would suggest is you just have a combination of these two types of citations and these two types of synthesis to add variety to your writing, so each paragraph doesn't sound like article 1 says this and article 2 says this, but you're strengthening those connections in this way. When you're quoting, you don't have to quote full sentences. You can eliminate words from the beginning of a sentence or from the middle of a sentence, and you can also paraphrase information and only quote relevant or insightful parts that are adding something significant to your paper or to your point. So don't feel pressure like you have to quote whole chunks of sentences, which can make your paragraphs very lengthy. You can do more paraphrasing and then just quote the relevant or significant parts. And the page, I'm looking at page 2 on the sample APA paper, so it's basically the first page, and we were looking at the second paragraph. So if you want to revisit this to see these examples and to read the sentences more carefully, feel free to do that. So that's synthesizing sources, and in a separate lecture video on APA general formatting, I talked about how you can use your sub-questions to help you organize your paper. So I'll just show you one more time. When you have your paper, remember you'll have your cover page, and then above your introduction you are restating your title in bold, and then you write your introduction. Now after your introduction, if you wanted to use your sub-questions to help you organize your paper, you would write it as a level 2 heading. Level 1 headings, which are centered and bolded, those are more for sections that typically appear in a research paper, like the literature review, the methodology, the results, discussion, etc. So you guys will not be using level 1 headers. What you'll be doing is using level 2 headers to create sections. So in this section, you can have you can literally put your sub-question, you can literally state your sub-question, and then you can answer that sub-question in multiple paragraphs under that section. So this would be very helpful for you if you are combining papers 2 and 3, because for paper you can write out the sub question that you answered for paper 2 and then just copy and paste the paper into paper 3 and making, you know, the relevant changes to make it flow. But you can do that. If you don't want to write the actual question itself, then you can create a kind of like a label for the topic. So you might have effective teaching, a contextual construct, or maybe I might say history of legal battles of physician-assisted suicide. So I would just have the general topic rather than asking a specific question. And so if you wanted to use your questions, that's how you would do it. Now, if under this question you have multiple subsections, so let's say I have this question and I'm talking about the effects of something and I have multiple effects and I wanted to create subsections under that sub question, I can do that by creating a level 3 heading, which will be italicized. So level 1 headings are bolded and centered, and the first letter of each word is uppercase. Level 2 headings are to the left margin and bolded, and each letter of each word is uppercase. Level 3 headings are to the left, bolded, and italicized. And I don't think you need to capitalize. Yeah, you do. You do need to capitalize each letter, each first letter of each word. So that's how you can use your sub questions to help you organize your paper. And of course, I'm grading you on APA format for this paper. And by APA format, I mean I'm looking out for your cover page, your in-text citations, and your references. And I have multiple lecture videos addressing that. If you feel like the Blackboard course is a little confusing to find those lecture videos on APA format because it's kind of divided up into different modules, then you can look on my YouTube page. I have a playlist for Writing 303. So you can click on that playlist and I have all of the videos that are relevant to this class. So you can see the videos on in-text citations and APA references, etc. And that's basically everything that I wanted to cover for your third essay. Of course, if you have absolutely any questions about it, feel free to email me and I will try to help as best as I can. Good luck with writing your paper, everyone.